Yo, what's going on, guys? It's G Miners here. Today, we have an infinite Warlock melee build that one hits everything. I've been trying to get this build to work properly for a while now and didn't really like how it felt until now, but in this build, we are going to be using the exotic gauntlets, Winters Guile. These things go hella unused, but I think it's just because Warlocks have never had a melee like Throwing Hammer that comes back on pickup or any melees that hit super hard at base. But these things are actually way better than Wormguide Caress in my opinion. On screen now, you can see the damage bonus we get per stack. For the first two stacks, this is going to be 130% extra melee damage and then 260% extra at 2 stacks. And you can see that we get all the way up to a 650% damage increase at 5 stacks, which is nuts. But you might be saying, that's exactly what we get with Worm Gods, so how is this better? But comparing to Worm Gods, at the first and second stacks, we're only getting 80% and 170%. In most cases where you are just using the build casually and sitting around 1 to 3 stacks as you're getting kills, Winters Guile is going to have a much stronger mid game, which is exactly what we'll be using these for, considering we have infinite melees. I even took the build into some harder content like the Legend campaign. Keep in mind, we're locked to 15 power under, so this is somewhat similar to a day 1 raid, and the Legend campaign does have additional modifiers that make it harder, but the build held up just fine here. And when I say fine, I mean it's pretty damn solid considering we are only using our melee. We're one-hitting super tanky enemies and having Chain Lightning take out trash adds in huge groups. And compared to other melee builds, we also aren't getting any extra healing from Restoration or Cure, or even getting an Overshield or Devour to proc like certain Void builds. I wouldn't say this is going to be your go-to GM build for the season, but it's super fun to mess around with and still performs really well. With 650% extra melee damage and the new Lightning Surge melee, there really isn't anything that's going to not get one-shot. To me, this feels a lot like the Infinite Fusion Nade build on Titans I made last season, one of the easiest to use and most enjoyable builds that also works in some harder content like raids, dungeons, and probably even master raids if you wanted it to. Before we get into the subclass layout, if you guys do enjoy the content, make sure to drop a like and sub below. Subbing is completely free, it helps me out a ton, and you can always unsub later. Starting off, I am on Chaos Reach here just for some added super damage if I need it. Unless you do have a specific build revolving around Storm Trance, I don't think it's really worth having. After this, you are going to want to be on the Chain Lightning melee ability. At base, this is going to have a lower cooldown, and since the Lightning Surge aspect doesn't seem to have a cooldown tied to it, I believe that by using this, we are able to benefit from the lower cooldown. This isn't going to come into play too often, but it will once or twice if you need that last bit of melee energy quickly. I know other cooldowns like Bleak Watchers do have override values, but this doesn't seem to. Let me know if I'm wrong in the comments below. And then your grenade ability won't matter too much with the build. I would just use whatever you like best as long as you can get some kills with it, because you may end up using this to make some ionic traces. Looking into our aspects, first up is going to be Electrostatic Mind. This is going to be essential for getting some much needed ability energy for the build. Anytime we do get an ability kill or kill an arc debuffed enemy, we're going to be generating ionic traces. Each trace is then going to give 12.5% of our melee back. And then after this is going to be Lightning Surge, which is the brand new Warlock melee ability. With this, we are going to be able to slide and then activate our melee ability to blink forward and land at an enemy. This is going to call down lightning that deals damage to the enemy, and then most importantly, jolt them as well. As you're going to see, this is also going to deal a huge amount of AoE damage, so anyone near the initial melee hit should also take some chain damage, which is separate from the jolting effect as well. So it's almost like 3 waves of damage hit here, which is going to be the initial hit, the aftershock AoE type damage, and then the jolting effect. The important part about the jolt, as I briefly mentioned, is going to come into play later with one of our fragments, and then since this is an ability, we are also going to be generating ionic traces with this, so right away, we're going to get a chunk of energy back. For our fragments, first up is going to be something that is interchangeable. This is going to be Spark of Recharge or Spark of Resistance. Depending on what you need for more high-end content, Recharge is going to allow you to have your melee ability up at all times, but you're going to take more damage. Resistance, on the other hand, will just be a crispy 25% damage reduction, which is going to help a ton because this is a melee build, so we will naturally take more damage. Spark of Feedback is going to increase our melee damage by 75% anytime we end up taking melee damage ourselves. If you manage to stack this with Winters Guile times 5, we're going to get a 7.5x multiplier on top of this 1.75x multiplier, which is just going to be over 13 times our base melee damage. Next up is Spark of Discharge. Arc Weapon Final Blows will now also have a chance to generate Ionic Traces. The main reason we have this is to build our melee from nothing. This is going to come into play if we load up into a new activity and are not immediately charged with light. We're going to need to burn our melee to get charged, and then need a way to get that second melee back, so it helps with getting the build going. And then lastly is Spark of Ions, which will create Ionic Traces on Jolted Final Blows. Electrostatic Mind does do this already, but there are internal cooldowns, so having multiple ways to spawn Ionic Traces on ability and Jolted enemy kills helps us maintain our melee ability. Weapon-wise, as I mentioned, you will want something that is Arc for Spark of Discharge, and if you can, a weapon that also jolts enemies will activate Spark of Ions. So anything with Volt Shot will be great for the build. And then once again, as a recap on Winters Guile, in case you guys are skipping around in the video, killing enemies with a melee, a base, or charged will give us stacks of increased melee damage. This will scale with all melee abilities, so by getting 5 melee kills, we're going to be dealing 650% increased melee damage, and then combining this with Lightning Surge, which hits like a truck at base and jolts enemies, is what really makes this build super strong against yellow bars and hordes of adds. You're going to need a bunch of mods for this build to work properly, so make sure that you're running everything I go over. First up is going to be Melee Wellmaker. This will spawn in elemental wells that match our subclass energy, so for us that's going to be Arc, every time that we get a charged melee kill. Elemental Wells at base is going to double the amount we spawn in just by having this on, so every melee kill will drop 2 Elemental Wells now instead of 1, and then the reason we're going to want 2 with this build is because of the mod Well of Striking. Now, when we pick up Arc Elemental Wells, we're going to also get increased amounts of melee energy back. Where this build really comes together is going to be with the mod Elemental Charge, which allows us to get charged with light upon grabbing our Elemental Wells, and then finally Heavy Handed. Heavy Handed is going to consume 1 stack of Charged with Light when using our charged melee ability, and then we are instantly going to get back 50% of our melee right away. I do also have 1 copy of Outreach on my class item, which does give melee energy when dropping rifts, and Trace Evidence. This generates Ionic Traces when killing Arc debuff targets. Not sure if this fully stacks with some of the aspects and fragments on the build, but this is another alternative if you guys do want to change some of the fragments up with your own version of the build. With everything working together after getting charged with light, all you need to do is get a kill with Lightning Surge. This is going to spawn 2 Elemental Wells, which give back energy and make you charged again for the next melee. And then you're also going to get 50% of your melee back from Heavy Handed. And then finally, the Ionic Traces you spawn should top your melee off. Ionic Traces can be weird. Sometimes only 1 will spawn. Other times they're going to literally get stuck on walls and objects. So if you do need more energy, getting an Arc Weapon kill or just dropping your Rift works perfectly. Winters Guile does also work with killing the jolted enemies, so you can easily maintain a good amount of stacks of Warlord Sigil. And if you are trying to one-hit melee an enemy or boss, just group up some adds, kill them, get your melee straight back, and you should have ×5 for an easy one-shot. If you guys do want to suggest some more Arc builds or have any questions, feel free to comment them below or even join my Discord server to ask me over there. We are also starting to run some speedruns this season beginning this week, so if you guys want to watch that and what the process is like, or just to come hang out, a link to my Twitch is in the description below. Anyways, that's all for this video, guys. As always, have a good one. Peace.